And I did promise to give some of the background on Yitzhak Kislev. So we will at least end off with some of the history, fascinating history, might add. Just to give you a very quick, like the important years of the evolution. So we're talking about the Baal Shem Tov passes away in the year 1760, right? Then within a year, his main student, the Maggid, the Ber Mezrich, takes over. He actually was one of Mezrich. He was in this town called Ravne for a lot of the time. He lived for another 12 and a half years, till like almost 13 more years. And at the end of from 1760 till the end of 1772, beginning 1773, was the Maggid. The Maggid passes away, as we said before, Yitzhak Kislev Tav Kuf Lamed Gimel. Okay? Within this span of time, Chassidus really took off. So even though, again, Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidus, he began his leadership openly and developing his community around, let's say, the year 1740. So he had like somewhere like maybe around 20 years, right? And he attracted some very interesting, important people, including rabbis and Magidim, as Shivchei Besh goes in detail. And but it wasn't this whole like relatively, let's call it, universal for the Pale Settlement type of movement yet. Words were getting out that there's this interesting group, unique, and there was already rumor that they're doing crazy stuff here and there. They were already beginning to be somewhat suspected as being heretical. And we even see in the times of Baal Shem Tov himself that there were opponents to the Baal Shem Tov. In fact, a lot of his core followers at the beginning were initially were against the Baal Shem Tov. But Baal Shem Tov, through his spiritual charisma and other things, attracted and developed them. The Maggid again takes over, and he attracts even more and really great rabbis like Shmelka Nikishberg and Pinchas the Balafla, right? These were great, and even later Reb Levi Barditchev was a very important rabbi, and others like this for like a little more than a decade, as we said. So it was in this period from 1760s to 1772-ish, in the Maggid, that the Hasidic movement was becoming more entrenched and more defined as its own distinct group, and its name spreading in good ways, but a lot in negative ways. And that is where it began developing the whole thing of Hasidim and Misnagdim in this period. So then what happened was that because of the certain acts, behaviors of the Hasidim, primarily the main issues that from the community's point of view was that they started making their own minyanim. So they started davening with their own nusach. And during the Maggid's time, even they started their own form of shchita with double-edged chalifs, knives, which they didn't until then. And I mean, we're not going to go into the detail. What does it mean? The difference of double-edged or not, and like, because the Misnagdim were prohibiting to use the Hasidic shchita because they're using these double-edged knives. What's wrong? Because a knife, according to shchita, should be chad v'chol. It has to be smooth and sharp. So double-edged is smoother, is sharper. I don't mean double, meaning that the blade itself I'm sorry. It means that the blade itself is sliced diagonally on both to like this, to a like a very thin V, rather than just being one side straight and being like that. You understand? So people talk about it has to do with shchita or the knife, but it didn't make sense until I read somewhere. I forget who it was. Someone pointed out. Actually, there was a change in development of metal then. Because what's the whole point? If you make it like this, a V, then to the contrary, in those times, the more primitive type of metal or steel, whatever they were using, it would easily be able to nick and disrepair. So, and that is worse. I mean, having a nick makes the shechita invalid. So therefore, in order to make sure it stays chalak, that smooth, no nick, they said it shouldn't be like this, be malutish. But they actually, it seemed like around that time, in the mid 1700s, they did develop a type of metal strong enough that would be able to stay sharp enough throughout, and therefore the Chassidim took on almost like more of a chumrah to use such knives. Okay, be it as it may, that there were other issues, and as we'll see hopefully soon in the Vilna Gaon's letter, where he's pointing out to. So with all this, and also what happened was, it started blowing up in the public in several ways. Both the communities, the main communities in the northern part of the Pale settlement, what we could call now Lithuania, White Russia, such. There was number one was Vilna. Then you also had Shklov. You also had Minsk. Then there were some others like Brody, which was more east, but they also had, and a couple other cities. So these main communities, there were Hasidic groups popping up, and again making their own minyanim and doing what have you. Other claims against Hasidim was that they're not obeying their parents who don't want them to become Hasidic. Things later on, not initially, there were issues of like that they start davening late, which rather was more the Hasidim initially were getting up early and just involved in holy service and practice and preparations for prayers, which they saw as part of the prayers anyway. What were the other claims? In prayer itself, that they would gesticulate a lot, make body movements, and also pray out loud. This was different of the way the prayer until then. Everyone stood immobile mainly and prayed at a lower voice tone. So they saw that as veering from the traditional path. And as we'll see later, there were even really more serious charges, like things of illicit sexual stuff and possibly homosexuality too. So be it as it may, in 1772 year, things started hitting even in publications. Entire tracts started being published, coming with these allegations against the Hasidic movement. The most famous is Zemer Aritzim, which was published in 1772, and what have you. And because of that, the Kahal community in Vilna, which is the number one Jewish community then, came out with an excommunication, a cherem, against the Hasidim. And this was signed by the heads of the community, and most importantly, the Gaon of Vilna, the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu himself signed off on it. Now, Rabbi Eliyahu, the Vilna Gaon, was very righteous, very learned. At the same time, he was a bit of a misanthrope. I mean, earlier in his life, he was a great traveler and wanderer. I don't know if you know this, but he would travel all about, and he did what we would call in Yiddish Pravda Golus, be in the state. But later in life, once he made it back to Vilna, he just stayed in his room and studied day and night. He wasn't intimately involved in community affairs, and when he was, he relied mainly on his assistants, people or representatives of the community, of the Kahal that will come to discuss things with him, and also with testimonies of people that will come to him. And he trusted people. That people, why should you think someone is lying? So he took some testimonies and he believed them, because Torah says you're supposed to believe it. So the Hasidim said, or alleged, or said that a lot of these witnesses were false, bearing false witness, and they misconstrued or led false or fed false information to the Vilna Gaon. Okay. Be it as it may, the first excommunication came out in 1772. This was at the very end of the Maggid of Mezrich's life. And this created such an uproar, not in only the Jewish community, but within the Hasidic, this still newish movement. So much so that the students of the Maggid even gathered together, and some even wanted to make a counter cherem, excommunication. And some may have or are highly attempted, including one of them was, I think, Shlomo Karliner, and maybe some others. But the Alter Rebbe Baal Tanya was very against it. And the Alter Rebbe, as he writes in one of his letters later, was saying that the Maggid himself didn't want that they should respond to the excommunication against them, but that they should be like the righteous that accept that they accept the shame, so to speak, and they don't respond. That's a very righteous thing. And if you respond, and then you're going to create even more havoc, even more antagonism, what have you. But suffice it to say, again, some within the Hasidic community did respond to it. But that was the first salvo. Okay, 1772. Okay, so there's a great book, amazing book called Chasidim u'Misnagdim, which was published by an academic, a person by the name of Mordechai Volensky, who himself actually came from a mixed heritage of Hasidic and Misnagdic families, and he collected all like the most important of all the primary materials of the disputations between Hasidim and Misnagdim, from, let's say, again, from like the early 1700s all the way to the early 1800s. I'm saying from the early 1770s till the early 1800s, okay? 1800s. That was the main period of the fights. And in short, in overview, there were three main waves of the disputations. Okay, one, like we said, 1772. The second was 1781, like 9 years later. That came about because in 1780, the Chassidim started publishing their own works. The first being by Rabbi Tadlis Yaakov Yosef of Polna. He published the Tadlis Yaakov Yosef, and then two more books, Ben Paris Yosef, Tzasot Hameach. And the Misnagdim found parts in there in the name of Baal Shem Tov that they said was being heretical. So that led to a second cherem, excommunication against the Chassidic books and the community of Chassidim. Now it was because of deeper theological reasons. All right. But and then that went on, and then the third wave, which we will focus on soon, mainly, started in 1790. You could say 1797-ish. Okay, most strongest. The 1796 actually. Okay. Because what happened was the following. Okay, before we go, just so you know, even between these three excommunications, these three waves of Chassidim against Misnagdim against Chassidim, there were other flares of disputations, and even other mini cherems, excommunications in different communities. Like there was something in Minsk, in Shklov, in a town called Vitz, and some others. So the truth is, it was always going on. But on a bigger level, it didn't. These were the three main ones. And what led to the third one was, now there's different versions of it, that, but according to the Misnagdic version was, that around the year 1795-96, there was a tzad, someone who was going around traveling, even through more east in like areas of Germany, so to speak, like specifically like Breslau or Hamburg, claiming, and with an assistant who claimed, this assistant who was a chassid. This is the alleged allegation, and he claimed that he is a son of the Vilna Gaon, and he was saying when he was asked that the Vilna Gaon has by now retracted his excommunication against the Hasidim. Okay, and word got back to Vilna. There was one of the leaders of Vilna. His name was Reb Zundel. I think he was a brother-in-law of Reb Chaim of Volozhin, great student of the Vilna Gaon, and he brought back supposedly this allegation. And word started spreading that maybe the Vilna Gaon doesn't really, is still not right. He signed on to the excommunication 2 decades before, early 1770s, and then again in the early 1780s, and now we're in the mid 1790s and on. And plus, the Vilna Gaon is now older. Plus, around this time in 1796-ish time, it says he became even more ill. He became quite fragile, and it's not even clear how not only physically healthy, how much, everything, how aware he was what was going on. And so in order to counter these rumors, the Vilna Gaon came out with a letter, or rather, what we'll say is the following: the community of, again, the Misnagdic community of Vilna came out with a letter reinforcing the excommunication of 1772. This is in the year 1790. 1796 is when, right, the end, towards the end, the fall or fall of 1796 is when they come out with the third cherem, excommunication. Then the community of Minsk comes to double check. They're not clear if this is an accurate or true cherem, and in response to that, the Vilna Gaon writes his own letter, separate of the community, reinforcing in detail, yes, it's 100% true that I still believe that the Hasidim are blasphemers, and they're still in cherem, excommunication. And then so then that gets back to the Minsk community, and so on and so forth, and that reinvigorated this opposition to Hasidim. And just to go a bit forward, just to get the full timeline here, and then the antagonism built up more over that year from late 1796 into 1796 into 1797. Okay. Then what happened was almost a year after the Vilna Gaon's last letter against the Hasidim, so he wrote his as we'll soon see, his letter against the Hasidim, that one we'll focus on at least, in the day after Yom Kippur, 1796. A year later, the Vilna Gaon passes away, Chol HaMoed Sukkot, 1797. Okay? And as soon as he passes away, it was like the Misnagdic Kahal of Vilna and others were like just waiting for for the Vilna Gaon to pass away, and then they came out full force against Chassidim, even more. And then for that year, from 1797 into 1798, it built up more and more. And then it was in the summertime or so of 1798 that the Misnagdim approached the actual government, the Tsar, and gave what we know as the Mesira, the allegations against the Hasidim. And that is when the Russian Tsarist government got involved in the case. They started doing their own secret investigation about what's the nature of this new group called Hasidim. That went through the summer of 1798 into the fall. Finally, and as we'll see, or I'll share at least, and this is parts of that I did translate. The Russians, the government, early on caught on that this is a false allegation, and we'll soon see what the letter of the allegation is. Let's see if we have time tonight. If not, we could continue next week. Okay, if people find it interesting. But still, as we know how bureaucracy works, even if you see that something is nonsense, but once you begin a case file, you don't close it right away. And also, the Russians then were hyper vigilant and even a bit paranoid. If you know the Russian history, that the Tsarina Yekaterina, Catherine the Great, passes away. I think it was around 1796-ish time. I forget already the exact date. And her son Paul, I think the first or second, takes over. And he is more religiously, he's less of a libertine and less of an enlightenment individual like his mother. His mother was very into like and in fact the court language was French. Actually, Catherine herself was of Germanic stock. She married into the Russian lineage. But she adapted, really became Russian and all that, but still had links to the West. But it was Paul who was more, what you would call narrow-minded, if you want to call it that. And he was also very, he tried to control more, he was more of a control freak. And he was also very more religious, and his whole point was to keep the religious status quo. Don't make any new religious movements or any other new movements. Also remember, this is the time of the French Revolution and Napoleon, and there were these new groups such as the Illuminati that were popping up. In fact, going through and what I translated, these documents from the Russian archives, there is reference in there that they suspect this new Hasidic movement could be associated with the Illuminati or with the French revolutionaries and all that. So again, even though early on they caught on that this is all being exaggerated, but they still pursued the case, and then finally they decided that this was after Simchas Torah time of 1798, to arrest the Alter Rebbe Balatanya, who was living then in Liozna, plus 30 of the most prominent Hasidim around that were in different places, some in Vilna and some somewhere else, and to bring them to St. Petersburg, to the capital, and question them, interrogate them, and get to the bottom of this. What is this new movement? Okay, so that is how the Alter Rebbe was arrested, and as we mentioned before, was taken down Petersburg, was imprisoned, and when he was there, he was first being interrogated orally, like a Q&A, oral examination, and we even have the document and the Q&A, which I translated also into English. But as they were doing it, it seems like that the Alter Rebbe's Russian was a little too basic, wasn't as sophisticated enough for him to articulate more deeper, profound concepts into Russian. So therefore he arranged that he will, therefore they allowed the Alter Rebbe to write his responses or to explain the parts of the questions that needed deeper elaboration, to write it in Hebrew, and then they will translate it into Russian for the government officials to go over and send to it. Now, just as, I mean, this is also part of the archives. It got all confusing a bit, like a bit lost in translation, twofold. First of all, the Chassidim already had experience of the Misnagdim corrupting texts. So they were very concerned that if it gets translated, it'll be either by mistakenly or maybe intentionally the words will be misconstrued, especially being that the experts in languages of translation were in, let's say, I think was in, like in Vilna, which was the hotbed of the Misnagdim. So imagine, it's like giving the testimony of a defendant to the prosecutor to control and to translate. Like, wouldn't you be suspicious? So therefore, the Alter Rebbe was very insistent that even after it's translated, he has the opportunity to look it over to make sure that it's a correct translation. Secondly, there was no one really that was sophisticated enough that could translate directly these deeper, like, religious concepts directly from Hebrew to Russian. Therefore, it had to be first translated from Hebrew to French, and then from French to Russian. You understand? So now it's being probably a very second degree or third degree away, which could even be more lost in translation. So that's so in the archives they go through that also. Now it's an extensive archive, a lot there. So what I'm going to do now, I'll show you some visuals of what I'm talking about. So firstly, I'm just going to show you the book, this 2-volume set from Valensky called Hasidim u'Misnagdim. He published it in the 1960s into the 1970s. Actually, he met the Lubavitcher Rebbe while he was working on it, and the Rebbe wasn't too happy about it, because the Rebbe's approach was that let bygones, especially quarrels from within the Jewish community, be bygones. Don't dig up skeletons of history, right? This is a later print of it, Chassidim Misnagdim, right? So it says here, as it says, this is all about the disputation between them from like circa 1772 till circa 1815. This is an example, okay? This is a facsimile of the Cherem, the second Cherem of 1781, summer of 1781. I'm not going to read this all through. It's mostly in Hebrew. There's a little Yiddish, but you can see, where can you see over here? The Vilna Gaon signs the mail somewhere. Gamanechi. Yeah, this is it. Gamanechi Ave Alachaisim. I too coming here signing the 24th of Menachem of summer. Tafkuf Mem Aleph 1781. He says, Eliyahu Reb Shul Zalach. So this is the Vilna Gaon's signature on that one. Okay, we'll get to the third one as promised soon. Okay, this is one text, and then I wanted to show you what I worked on the translation stuff without Rebbe's actual responses. Here, okay. Again, this is pre-publication. It's a work in progress. Therefore, I'm not making it really public. But if someone is really interested in this, I'll consider maybe sharing it. Okay, so this is what I worked on. I think it was like 2 years ago. Primary documents, timeline related to the arrest, liberation, Alter Rebbe. But as an aside, just so you know, this wasn't the only arrest. 2 years later, almost to the day, he was arrested a second time. Follow-up with similar but even more deeper allegations against the Hasidic movement. And again, there's a whole Q&A, questions and answers. And that too we have. Though we do not have the original Hebrew, but we do have a Russian translation of it, all right, which it was translated into Hebrew. The whole thing, no, that's my whole point. That's why when someone was asking before, are these materials known amongst the Chassidim? My answer is a lot of it is not known. Because it's more in these, it's in original Hebrew, or it's in books that people don't really read, and so on and so forth. All right, so this is and including the materials I have here is also is not that known. So okay, so here's the picture of the Shnei Zalman Alter Rebbe, alleged picture, I should say. Some claim this was actually a picture of a descendant of the Alter Rebbe from who lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s, who supposedly looked like the Alter Rebbe. Okay, there's another picture that they allege is Alter Rebbe where he looks similar. If you go online, there was like in 15 years ago or so, Chabad Online published it. But be it as it may, this is the supposed picture that's been accepted by most of the Alter Rebbe. This is a picture of Paul I, who was the Tsar who arrested Alter Rebbe. And just know, it wasn't just like the Tsar, it was under his, like it was his government who was about. No. As I mentioned before, the Tsar, the Tsar Paul was a bit paranoid. He was also a micromanager. So in these archival materials, which I also translated, the Tsar himself intervenes and gives specific orders what to do. It's several times, like at least 3-4 times through these weeks of the Alter Rebbe being arrested. The Tsar, in his own words, is saying what to do, including to liberate the Alter Rebbe himself, is in the Tsar's own words. And the date of it is exactly Yutas Kislev. Okay? So this isn't just alleged. We have primary contemporaneous official records and confirming a lot of the I won't say hearsay, but the traditional narrative of the story and the dates. Okay? So again, it's indisputable, a lot of the stuff. Here are pictures of the other major players of the Russian government that were involved, and which are also in this archival trove, which you translated. One was the Procurator General. He was like the Procurator General of this. It was a position of like Attorney General together with head of Senate. Okay, it's like who's the head of the Senate now? Whoever it is, and Attorney General of America as one. And he was the number 2 most important person in the Russian Empire, the direct advisor to the Tsar. He was very involved in the whole case and the investigation, and there's letters back and forth between him, the Tsar, and him and the following characters. Bulgakov, who was the governor of Lithuania, which included Vilna, where a lot of the Chassidim were. And another character, which I couldn't find a picture of him, is Zhegulin, who was the governor of Belarusia, which is where Alter Rebbe was in the Yashna. And he was also like part of the Secret Service, or you want to say like the CIA, or more like the FBI or something, doing investigations. Okay. Here's my own timeline. A little bit I spoke already, right? 20th September, 1797, Vilna Gaon passes away. I'm sorry. Here I should add that based on this, there was actually a 4th cherem, main cherem, which is literally the day of, or the day after the Vilna Gaon is buried. Yeah, the day after Vilna Gaon is buried. Right away they come out with another open, even more intense cherem against the Chassidim to ban them from from the community and all that. And then, as I mentioned, for the subsequent year, different events happened, boycotts, violence even. I don't want to go through the details of the violence, how they were beating up Hasidim. Some had really escaped, they were almost didn't make it, let's put it that way. And it got so bad that the Hasidim even had submitted complaints to the authorities. That itself, it seems like the Alter Rebbe was upset. Based on from 1772, he said you should just receive the shame and not act on it. But some Chassidim was like a matter of their just living and livelihood and all that. More complaints come both sides, and then came the letter of libel against the Chassidim. That was May 1798, and we'll soon see an actual facsimile of the letter. And then, as I mentioned, the investigation went through that summer between the general prosecutor, procurator, and the governor of Lithuania and others. And then, as mentioned, that the Alter Rebbe is already on his way to St. Petersburg after Simchas Torah, like at the end of Tishrei, 1798. Back and forth, more letters between the governor and Attorney General, let's call it. Then it goes to interrogation of Alter Rebbe. That's in October, and then he writes down again the text we'll soon see, also there. Then they go to make the French translation. and they'll cut it back. And then finally, the 19th of Kislev, here the Tsar orders the release of the Rebbe and Chassidim, but to still keep an eye on them. So that's what happened. So even after he was released, so 19th of Kislev then was in November, so it was still in 1798. They still didn't let the Chassidim fully off the hook. They were still keeping tabs on them, and that's why they arrested Alter Rebbe a second time 2 years later. Okay? This now is the actual letter of libel against the Chassidim. Okay, so it's written in Russian, and it's the signature. It says on the bottom, if you can see, it says Neum Tzvi Hirsch Ben. It's supposed to say Tzvi Hirsch Ben or something David. Okay, but if you look at the word, the Hebrew, it's not the way a person who normally writes Hebrew would write. First of all, the word Neum, which is, we say, like the one who's signing, you start off with the word Neum, is misspelled. It's supposed to be Nun Aleph Vav Mem Safit. Here's Nun Ayin without the Vav and a weird Mem Safit. Even the word Tzvi here, and even the word David is weird. The whole thing, it looks more like someone who actually is just trying to copy and some words, or doesn't know Hebrew well. So already the Russian officials already saw this letter as suspicious because it looks like a bit like a fake name, and a good part of their investigation was to see if such a person really exists. Tzvi Hirsch, the son of David. Okay, what is the allegation letter here? Here's my translation of it, but I'll just go so you can see a bit. It says, in the Belarusian region of the town of Yazhny, there's a character surfaced. One Zalman Baruchovich, right? That's a patronym, which means in those days they didn't have full last names, but they would refer someone with the father's name. It means the Alter Rebbe's father was Baruch, so they called him Zalman Baruchovich, who till this day they use this in Russia, patronyms, who is networking, going about gathering young Jews who are delinquents and making lists of them with intention to get them to assist the revolution happening in France. So what was going on? They realized that if they start up the Russian government with like some esoteric stuff, they're not going to get attention. But if they write a letter, you have subversive rebels who want to overthrow the Russian government in our midst right here, that's going to perk up the interest of the authorities, right? Is that where they? Okay, that's number one. And delinquents, he's creating these rebels. Meanwhile, they do not do anything else other than that while they wait to join the French Revolution, they live without any structure, filled with various indulgences and much extravagance. They drink and eat excessively and loiter about, leading each other into debauchery. They also steal and take bribes and shower much misfortune, great shame on all their relatives. This alleged person, which turns out they never really found out who this is, it's a fictionalized person. He says, my children too, my very sons, stole all my money in excess of 10,000 rubles. And they made their way to, and gave it to the Rebbe. This was almost like those allegations they would make in the 60s and 70s, lahavdil, of people who got sucked into cults, that the guru brainwashes them and gets them to empty their bank accounts and even go and get money from their parents to right. So it's almost like that with this new cult, and this guru leader is getting all the money, and this in fact is a little bit, and Harvey will discuss a little bit later at some point if we have tonight or maybe next week. We were talking about the Vilna Gaon's letter about breaking honor, kibudah ve'ein, breaking, honoring your father and mother, and if this is a part of it, and they were actually taking, stealing from their parents. He continues, I was unable to follow up on the whereabouts of my sons and other miscreants due to payoffs. Payoffs meaning that they paid off the children and all that. They couldn't find them. They also have comrades, and there are disciples of this Baruchovich in the city of St. Petersburg who intercede for them and protect them, saying this isn't just some small minor character. He has implants in the capital even that are subversively defending him. So you got to watch out. There are even enemies within. So then he continues. The only sentence they deserve is that they be drafted and be sent to the battlefront. Right? They're the wars, especially against the French, or perhaps to exile them to the prairies. I think this means down to like what is now where all the war is happening between Russia and Ukraine. Because that was the time Catherine the Great conquered and took over these areas of eastern, southeastern Ukraine, and she renamed it Nova Russia, right, including the Crimea. It means New Russia, and in fact, Putin is invoking that now. That's why Putin is saying now that there is no Ukraine. What are you talking about? In the days of Catherine the Great and Paul the First and all that, it was Nova Russia. We legitimately took it over in the 1770s, 80s, 90s. In fact, it was in 3 waves that you'll see through different wars, including the 7-Year War, which was the whole of Central Europe was fighting each other. Frederick the Great and right, and Catherine, and who was the third of Austria? Yeah, the Kaiser. So, and in fact, that was the time that Poland just fell apart, diminished part by part until it did not exist by the late 1700s, and only became a country again after World War One, briefly, just between the wars, you could say, till the end of World War II, and then the Soviets took it over, or it became part of this, the satellite countries of the Soviet Union, even if it wasn't officially part of the Soviet Union. And it was only after the fall of the Soviet Union that Poland finally became fully independent again. And it's important, this whole partitions of Poland is important to the whole case here, as we'll see, if not tonight, next week. Both them and Zalman leaders should exile them. And they'll have all their holy land, they'll eat their Sher Habar of Yasan, they'll be in their Messiah. All this I present under oath between His Royal Highness the Tsar for his astute considering that execute the law, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this started the whole case against Dr. Rebbe. Signed Hirsch Dr. Rebbe. Then there's all the letters between, again, I said all the different highest of officials in Tsarist government. We're not going to go through all of it, but I'm just going to flip through. You could just see like on the margins here, the Tsar's order, instruct Bulgakov to investigate this matter. If it is verified that they are guilty, then as per the law, they are to be brought before the court. If it is verified that they participate in any revolutionary activities and the like whatsoever, then they are to be sent to me immediately. Do notify me of everything about this. And then goes on. This is all during the period they're doing the secret investigation to decide if they're going to arrest the Chassidim, Rebbe Shnei Zalman, yada yada. Goes on and on. Oh, this is the actual Q&A. This is once they arrest and they bring the Alter Rebbe to St. Petersburg. Here's the QA. Look, question. This is like the good old style Soviet interrogations. They after the Soviet Union fell, they opened them up, and you could read all the Hasidim who were arrested and how they were being interrogated. And a lot of them are like this. So, what is your name, your title? Where do you live? So the Alter Rebbe answers his name, what he does, religion, and what is your profession? Do you pay taxes to the treasury according to him? And he says, yes, actually my wife she has like a dry goods store, a food store, and I'm part of this merchant guild, 3rd class, and I pay my taxes new. And then it goes on to other things. He's asking, what is this group called Karliners? Before Hasidim even were identified fully clearly by the name Hasidim, they were first known as Karliners, because one of the main Hasidic Rebbes of the Lithuanian White Russian territories was the Karlin. So the name Karlinas was still stuck, and then it was also being used a bit disparagingly too. Because some of the Misnag didn't call Chassidim Chassidim. Chassidim is a nice name. They're being honored. They're the pietists. But no, they still call them Karlinim. So this is one place where he says, the Alter Rebbe responds orally, because of the difficulty of this question, I cannot explain this without an interpreter. But there was no real interpreter, so therefore they allowed him to write it down, as we will see. Then he asked, what is the origin of this sect of Chassidim? Who is its leader? Who are the followers? From whom did he inherit this position? And then he gives a little bit preamble. A lot of what the Alter Rebbe's approach is trying to say we're not doing anything novel, new. We're just continuing this line of there being certain type of rabbis, either to adjudicate the law or to teach, or to be spiritual mentors or people to inspire the community, so on and so forth. says, what is the main objective of the sect? How does it attract the public of the Jews? This too, he says, I'm going to explain later in writing, so to speak, without interpret. Okay, about new customs, yada yada. Who collaborates with you or assists you in your activities, but what is the nature of connections with overseas, with whom? As mentioned, the Alter Rebbe was very involved in collecting money in the Pale settlement to send to the needy in Israel. And that it's its own saga, because the Chassidim, there used to be one main way to send the money, but then once there became this partition between the Chassidim and others, then the Chassidim created their own money collection and sending for the Chassidim that were already living in Israel. And then not long thereafter, in the early 1800s, already in the mid 1805s and so on and so forth, even within the Chassidim it split. That Chabad started its own collection separate of the other Chassidim, and that is what we have, an organization that exists till today. The oldest continuous organization in Chabad is called Koilel Chabad, which started around then, like 1802 or 1803, to collect money specifically for the Chabad Chassidim in Israel. And now Kol Chabad, which is run by Rabbi Shalom Duchman, provides for all. And actually, they do a lot of good work. They do a lot of like giving food to the poor or helping refugees and things. It's a lot about physical health, not just about spiritual stuff. Okay. So this goes on, and then here, he says, I know I heard of a Jew in Vitebsk. Turns out that's not the real person. This is an example of the letter, like Lupachin's letter, like the Attorney General. On the bottom, these two lines is from the Tsar. These letters do not, it's debatable if these are the very original documents or if they are contemporaneous copies. Then they have a summation of the case. And here's another Tsar's order. Considering this Baruch Havish, about him establishing the sect and about the rest, he is to write responses to thorough and detailed questions that he will be asked in the local Jewish language. So now the Tsar allows Alter Rebbe to continue the interrogation in writing. And here is the actual script of the Alter Rebbe, what he wrote in prison, answering the allegations against him. And it's quite a few pages here. If you see over here, it says Mashanika Balash and Russia, right? You could see, if you know Hebrew enough, and in how to read the script, it's quite legible, quite, I won't say easy, but it's pretty easy enough to read even without having it typed out. It's 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages, 6, 7, if I recall, it's like 8 pages. No, 7 pages. Okay? Now, in fact, this is just a facsimile like this, but I saw pictures, not like a couple of years ago, of those who actually went to the archives and saw it in books open, and it's amazing to see it's still in pristine condition, without any like creases or anything or marks of old age. It looks fresh. It looks like it was in other words, it was extremely well preserved, and it's there in the official archives. This is a map of Poland and the 3 partitions of 1772, 93, and 95. And I'll just tell you one thing why these partitions are so important. It's because the 3rd partition is when, see, Vilna is here. It's during the 3rd partition that Vilna finally came under Russian domain control. Until then, it was part of Poland. Poland was more democratic and allowed more of religious freedom. And it would look the other way, even if you decided to make your own new religious movement or even cult. So the geopolitics here is very important. Why it was Dafka after 1795, the years, again, when the 3rd Cherem took off, and when they actually made the libel, the allegation to the actual government, directly to the government. And it was to the Russian government, not to the Polish government, because Poland didn't exist anymore at this point. And the Misnagdim in Vilna knew how how much the new czar then, Paul the First, was against new religious movements. Presto, all they have to do is come allegations of the new religious movement, and they'll be persecuted. Right? So that went on. Okay, and here is my translation of it. Now, we're not going to go into detail. What I did do is I divided it into chapters and gave them headings. So we'll just look at the headings so you'll get a sense of the subjects that the Alter Rebbe discussed and what he was replying to. So one was, again, like, it's not in the actual letter of allegation, but was part of the case of them starting a new movement was, as we mentioned before, the Hasidim are using novel customs in their prayers. Mostly, as we mentioned before, that they're gesticulating a lot and davening loud. In the second arrest, even they said that they're using certain words, certain vocalizations in the prayers, like af, 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 which the Mistadim claimed is that they're trying to invoke the wrath, like af, of God. Okay? Sounds a little outlandish, but that's what was going on. So anyways, we're going to skim through this quickly just to see the headings. Worshiping, and you'll get the whole gist of it. Worshiping God is comprised of two parts. There's Torah study and prayer. We know this, and we spoke about this last week's too, also Kabbalistic. And he goes through what it means. It's like he's explaining the basics of Judaism to Gentiles. Chapter 2. The obligation to prayer with kavanah. Why kavanah, having the right focus and concentration or intention, so is parcel of prayer, and it's essential to prayer. And it's not easy. And therefore, chapter 3, learning how to pray with kavanah. You need special way training to know how to pray with kavanah. And chapter 4, past generations prayed at length with kavanah. And he invokes the famous Mishnah where the first Hasidim would meditate before, spend time, and kavanah before they prayed, and so on. But then what happened was, that we lost the art of davening with kavanah. This is basically Chassidus 101, that the primary achievement of Chassidus was how to daven. And that is the primary aspect of Chassidus officially till this day. And that's also, incidentally, why Reb Zalman was so much into davenology, because that's the number one thing that's important. But then what happened, in our later generations, corrupt rabbis purchased the rabbinate from local officials. You can't trust the rabbis anymore, and they're just there they're monopolizing the communities, and they're trying to dissuade people from doing the right, proper way of davening and so on. They debased the value of prayer and heightened the importance of acute study, right? All become big amdanim, or forget about prayer. 7, the control of these rabbis fell when the Russian Empire expanded into Poland, as we showed about the partitions. Right? So the control of it fell when the Russian, okay. So actually the Alter Rebbe is saying now there's something positive now that you, the Tsar, have now taken over the whole Poland, or your parts of Poland, because now you're getting rid of corruption. And now we can get back to the real Judaism, which is people were inspired to pray kavanah and gestures. If you want, you can look at this. Okay. This awakening that inspired us recently, behold, this phenomenon is present, somewhat common even with youth under 25 years old. For those youth are dependent, blah, 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 and do not have any French words. So he's saying that to reinvigorate, reestablish kavanah, they started the focus with the young, because it's easier for them to learn new ways. But because they're praying with such kavanah, their youthful passion causes them to make unintentional gesticulations with their hands and feet. This also sometimes we alter it, for just like it happens in universal situations. And when someone speaks from the heart, he gestures with his hands or feet, each according to his personality. For example, when he's angry and also when he is happy, he claps with his hands. So too it is with prayer, with kavanah, only in a slightly different style. And goes on and on, okay? Then further, those who pray with kavanah are only a minority, who are called Hasidim, explains. In Vilna, they are called Karliners and are slandered out of hatred. And we didn't really go into detail the backstories of what was going on in Vilna. We'll see if we have time tonight or not. 11. The custom is to appoint a Maggid who preaches in the synagogue. So the Alter Rebbe is saying, I am not a control freak. I'm not this guru who's brainwashing. I'm just following this tradition of there being a Maggid a preacher, basically. 12. We also add a rabbi Maggid who preach about prayer, and this is what I do. 13. There are those who want to hear my sermons, want to settle their disputes. So that's what I'm doing. He's saying my main job is I sermonize and I adjudicate between parties who are in different whatever issues, situations. As we know, the Alter Rebbe was not only was a great, of course, in mystical teachings and esoteric stuff and drush, but he was also the author of the whole Shulchan Aruch. He was a great posek. He was a great legal authority. 14. I am Maggid of Liazna for 15 years, and I'm not creating a religion. For these slanders are out of spite. By the way, I have all these footnotes. Also, I add more to the actual text. 15. The customs related to Kabbalah influenced liturgy. Goes through the different customs that there are. 16. I began studying Kabbalah with the Maggid of Mizrich and continued on my own, but most of my sermons are on a simple level. And he goes a little bit into the background of Kabbalah, and he's basically saying, I'm not inventing any new teaching, but these are all the bases of his sermons and his lectures, lectures and sermons are all based on Kabbalah already, which is very public. And incidentally, there was Christian Kabbalah already out then by this, in these years that was known to the more esoteric groups amongst the non-Jews, and it was somewhat accepted. So he's saying, I'm just following this continuation. He goes through the names of various Kabbalistic books that he uses. Then he goes, as of the whole money thing, if you remember the allegation that he's taking money, he says, I do not take money from visitors, only from my wife's business and for preaching. He says visitors of means are requested to donate for the Sabbath meals, so he gets a little extra just to provide for the community, for the visitors. And then about supporting the money he collects to send to the Holy Land to Israel, and the envoys, the letters, recommendations, he goes a little bit of that. He said, I do not refrain from writing letters or appeal to arouse others to mercy, not to, it's only to arouse others to mercy, not to order anyone. Meaning, again, he's not brainwashing, controlling anyone, he's just suggesting to people, like any rabbi would. Then he says, as of sending out emissaries or for his teachings or collect money, he's not the only one. All the Jewish communities do that. So why am I any more at fault than them? And then at the end, he speaks about this Rabbi Avolpa. There's a whole separate story which we won't go into. Rabbi Avolpa used to be a disciple of the Maggid, but he defected and became anti-Hasidic, and he caused some also ruckus, which led to the Hasidim being accused of things. And he says also here that he doesn't have any real contact with the Karliners, so don't identify him with the Karlin, and so on. Okay, and so that's the meat that's of his written responses. And it goes on before about getting to translate it. Look at here, the Tsar's order. The king, the Tsar, by issuing a order, grants permission to send testimony documents to Bulgaria in order to translate them in secret and that they be returned as soon as possible. Also send to Bulgakov the instruction that when the investigation ends, he is to send back only the investigation documents, and the Jews associated with this to remain in prison. Then goes through the French translation part and all that. Then there's a summary of the testimony of Dr. Rebbe. This is all very official, very bureaucratic, as you see. And by the way, these are not all the letters. I selected just the main ones that are relevant to get the whole net story, but there's more. Lupachin then reports to the Tsar the results of the investigation, and the Tsar's order to release all the Hasidim. And as you'll see here, here's at the end, here's the final order, which is dated actually at this Kislev. Here it is. To inform Lord Bulgakov the high order of His Royal Highness that the Tsar did not find in the behavior of the Jews who established the Karliner sect, I mean Chassidim, anything that can be harmful to the state, nor any degeneracy or anything else that can disrupt the collective calm. So he is ordered to release them all, assuming that they cannot find anything suspicious in their conduct or intentions that are against the well-being of the state. They need to be strict, but yet we're letting them free, but yet they need to be strictly supervised, particularly regarding the context between them and their correspondences. Also, do find out if the suspicious information was only in spoken words or also in writing, okay? I was granted permission from the highest authorities to write this. I conclude, 16 November, 1790. These belongs in the end. That's the actual order in the name of the Tsar to release the Alter Rebbe and Chassidim. And this is the official document releasing the Alter Rebbe from Lupachim to Shegulin. In order to, I write that Zalman Baruch Chaim is released, and he has you need a special pass to travel, especially from different provinces. It gave to do. This is the certificate of release. Again, and that's dated 20th of Kislev. And this also confirms what we know in Chabad tradition, that the Alter Rebbe was informed that he was freed on the 19th of Kislev, but he was actually let out of prison the next day, the 20th of Kislev. And therefore, the actual, again, edict of the Tsar here is 19th Kislev, 16th November, but the actual certificate of release is a day later, 17th of November. So all this coheres and confirms with the Chabad and Hasidic narrative. The question is whether Rebbe Karlin persecuted, not directly, but some others. Chaikel of Amdur, which is another Rebbe, he was actually, the story is that there was 30 other Chassidim, and actually they were a lot of them were still on the way to St. Petersburg when the conclusion was that they should be released. So there was also letters back and forth that they don't have to send them back home, right? But the point is that, okay, Rabbi Aaron of Karlin already passed away in the times of the Maggid, in 1770 actually. He's known as Rabbi Aaron HaGadol, then, or Hazakin, I think. And then Rabbi Shlomo Karliner took over. He wasn't his son. So people think he was his descendant. No, he was a student. He was known as Shlomo Karliner. And it was because Rabbi Aaron Karliner's son, grandson, what have you, was too young. So that's why there's Aaron and Shlomo at this period, but I don't think they were arrested. Shlomo Karliner was an interesting character of his own right. Well, maybe we'll speak about him another time. But it seems like, okay, and when it comes to Avigdor, the answer is, it seems like he was more involved in this is what it seems like to me. He was more involved in the second arrest. Some say maybe he was involved with Hishman David. He was also hanging out, it seems like, in St. Petersburg, and he was like making contacts with higher officials to get different things going. If I recall, he was more associated with the second. By the way, Avigdor wasn't just a person. Avigdor was the Rav of Minsk, of Minsk, or Pinsk, I forget. Maybe it was Pinsk. And in fact, he usurped the Levi Yitzchak. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchev was the Rav there, and it was Avigdor who took him over. Okay, so now we're just going to skip through. You see, we don't have enough time to go into detail. I just wanted to show you and set up. Maybe if people ever want, we'll continue next week. This is specific what we're going to look at right here, just for a couple minutes. So you see generally that this is again the third wave of the end of 1797. Okay, and this is exactly what we were discussing last week. Okay, so first is the letter of the Vilna community reinforcing the Chayrim of the Chassidim. Again, at the story, as I said before, that there was the son of the Vilna Gaon, imposter, who claimed he was a Chassid, that his father retracted the Chayrim. So it's all brought down here, and they're saying no. It's reinforced, And he said, because of that, now we're going to, here's the letter of denial of the Vilna Gaon. It's dated Sivan 1790, Sivan 1796. Yes, 1796, as we said. I'm sorry, it wasn't before I said, and the 1796. This is the letter of denial. I just don't want to read it too much in detail now because we don't have time. We'll share that next week. But even this letter of denial, the Vilna Gaon, is also signed here. There's Eliyahu ben Martchai. That's another one. Maybe that's who you're referring to. Yisrael Label was one of them. A few others, a lot were anonymous. So yeah. So it's a whole own genre of literature in a way, right? Okay, so he signs. So the Vilna Gaon signs within here. He says he says that we here Eliyahu Reb Shneur Zalman of Vilna, or Shlomo Zalman rather of Vilna, and then you have these 5 people attesting this is the accurate signature of the Vilna Gaon. Again, I mentioned before, Vilna Gaon was already not well, or testing. Then, as I mentioned before, the community of Minsk wasn't sure if it's authentic. This letter of establishing him or confirming it. So they write to Minsk. Tishrei of Zion, right? Tishrei of 1796. Is it true, basically? Plus, they sent their own messengers from Minsk to speak to the Vilna Gaon to make sure it's true. So the heads of the community of Minsk to make. Then comes the letter that we quoted a bit last week orally, and we're not going to go through in detail now, but maybe we'll do next week. This is the letter exclusively by the Vilna Gaon himself, the day after Yom Kippur, 1796, Shuvas Eliyahu. And this is the one where he says that the Megalim Torah Panim B'Torah Shalei Halacha, that they're distorting the Torah and Halacha in the 3 things of Kibud Av V'Aim, B'Pasik Kabed Asavicha, as you see right down here. And then he goes even there, Megalim Panim B'Torah Shalei Halacha B'Amrim Yakar Bein Hashem. Yakar, the word Yakar, Yud Kuf Reish, it doesn't mean value, but if you flip it around, it spells out the word Keri. Keri means letting out emission, to be a little tzniut about it. And what does it mean in this context? We could talk about next week. And then the most important quote that's usually quoted is that they say that this is your God Israel, that even every piece of wood and stone also is God. And so therefore they corrupt the Torah, meaning of that God is present, manifested in the world all over. And again, this relates to everything we spoke about in the past more than once, the debate between Chassid and Misnagdim about the immanence of God in our world, the physicality, also related to if the tzimtzum is literal or not, and all that discussion. Okay, so this is all in this letter. And you see it's a long letter. In most publications, when they bring down this letter, all they copy over is these 4 or 5 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they don't mention any of the rest of this letter. So that's why it's important to see full primary text. And this he signs, and he's attested again that's true. Then you have the conclusion of Minsk, their own, as a result of the letter from the letter, they come out their own, in addition to Vilna coming out, now Minsk comes out against the Chassidim, reinforce the Cherem. So again, this whole long, and it goes off, they give their things that they want the Chassidim to do, as we mentioned before. 1, not to make their own minyanim, not to change the nusach, as I mentioned before, not to use their own type of knives for shchita, and on some other stuff. Then, just to end off, after these letters, there's a letter of the Alter Rebbe to his own Chassidim in Vilna. The Chassidim of Vilna were the ones that were most persecuted. So now he writes his own letter, which includes a lot of fascinating historical important materials about the whole backstory and dispute between Chassidim and Misnagdim. So some call this the letter of response of the Vilna Gaon, of the Alter Rebbe to the Vilna Gaon. But in truth, it's not really a response letter. You could say this letter is in response to the general reactivation of the new cherem against the Chassidim, and therefore he's coming out. And this is this is a letter again, sometime in that time, end of 1796, beginning of 1797. That is here, and we'll look at it hopefully next week. And it's very interesting stuff. So maybe if time permitting, next week what we'll do is we will go a little bit more in detail in these things, the letters of the Misnagdim and the Alter Rebbe's follow-up letter to it. Okay, I think that's very essential, very interesting too. Just as one more point is this very year, Tavkuf Nun Zayin, which leads into end of 1796, 1797. So it's also the time when the Alter Rebbe was just published the Tanya anonymously. Okay, so one can say that the publication of Tanya itself also helped intensify the machloket. But it's when the community of Vilna Minsk, communities of Vilna Minsk, and the Vilna Gaon wrote the letters we just saw before, the Tanya was not printed yet. It was already sent to the publisher at that point, but it wasn't actually published until a couple months later. Okay, again, that helped inflame it, and then as we mentioned earlier, it just built up, intensified until like a year later, the Vilna Gaon passed away, and then a year later was when the Alter Rebbe was actually arrested, and as they say, and the rest is history. Amish, thank you very much, Chavra. I'm not going to sing the whole part of Shalom. We will finish with the song for Yutis Kislev, which ends off with 3 words: Va'ani eftach bach, and I have full trust in you. Va'ani eftach bach, Va'ani eftach bach, Va'ani eftach bach, Va'ani eftach bach, Va'ani eftach bach. And I have full trust in you, and I have full trust in you. Eftach bach. Okay, Chavra, just I know it's later than normal, but it's good. We Farbrengen sometimes it goes later. Yutis Kislev you're supposed to Farbrengen till late. And as mentioned, tonight is the Rav Shabbat's anniversary, a time to Farbrengen too. So thank you very much for all those who stuck all the way to the end. And thank you very much. A gute Nacht, and really, really thank you, Mamish, from the bottom of my heart, soul, and everything. So everyone in Facebook land, Laila Tov. If you're other places in the farther east, good morning, and only peace and love, baby.